Yeah, so keel bone damage can be divided into two general areas. You get keel bone fracture, which is where the bone actually breaks, and it usually happens along the midpoint of the keel or down towards the keel tip. And then there's keel bone deviation, which is a curvature of the keel or an indentation to the keel bone surface. There's evidence to suggest that keel bone fracture is, and although evidence is limited, we like to give animals the benefit of the doubt because they have similar morphology to us, they have a central nervous system and so on, and if you've ever broken a bone yourself, you'll probably know it's pretty painful. Laying hens are quite unique amongst birds in that we artificially keep them in a laying period for a year. In the wild, birds would go into lay for a short period during the spring, they would lay a clutch of eggs, and then they would stop. And during that process of having to lay eggs, birds change part of their bone structure from something called cortical bone to medullary bone. And the medullary bone is a source of calcium for egg formation. But medullary bone is also weaker, and so it's more susceptible to breaking. And laying hens, because they're in a laying cycle constantly for a year, they have a lot of medullary bone which isn't as strong, and therefore they're more susceptible to bone fracture. Definitely we see more keel bone damage, both fractures and deviations, in loose house systems, so both barn and free range systems. It's less prominent in rich cage, but it certainly isn't totally absent in enriched cages, and in conventional cages it's still present to a degree, but lesser still. So it seems to be an association between the freedom of movement, so the ability to move about and crash into things. Hens are kind of clumsy flyers, particularly in the downward step, and the more furniture in their environment makes that more likely to happen. And this is in part where the controversy comes when it comes to perches, is that perches are a structure that are installed in the house. Birds like to perch, but they're putting pressure on the keel bone when they're using the perch, and it also means there's more things in their environment that they might hit. I think every flock has this problem at the moment, so every barn and free range system, hens will be there that have keel bone damage. But yes, if you increase the proportion of the national flock that are in loose house systems, then that means you'll have more birds that have keel bone damage. But we're certainly making as much work as we can to look into exactly why it happens, how you can mitigate it, and what it means for the hens. And the breeding companies are also interested in trying to reduce that, because nobody wants to have an animal that's suffering. In an ideal world, you would have no bird that suffers with keel bone damage, but the reality is that's not going to happen. At least it's not going to happen tomorrow, it's not going to happen next year. That's a judgment call that I don't think anyone can answer, but if we look at other issues that affect animal welfare, we're trying to make those judgments. Sometimes we do have standards for which, say, mortality, maybe 5% mortality or less, okay, maybe that's acceptable, but over 5%, and I'm just using example figures here, we might say that's not. We may want to draw a line in the sand where we say this is too high and this is too low, but I think that is kind of an artificial figure that we have to come up with based on the risks and the reality of what might happen. What can producers do to reduce it? Well, there might be strains coming along the line, not tomorrow, but there might be strains that have stronger keel bones than others, so if that happens, then those might be the strains to use. They can sensitively install things like perches so that they aren't too high. We know that structures that reach up to the rafters are more likely to cause keel bone damage than low structures, so installing perches and furnishings that aren't too high so the birds aren't moving around so much.